Good morning, everyone. Delighted to have you here. I'm Jim Morgan. I'm the artistic director here, and we're on the set of our current fabulous little hit, big hit, Closer Than Ever. And the big news over the last couple of days is that we've extended. We will close down for next week, and then we will reopen on the 23rd, and we are selling tickets now through August 25th, and we'll see what happens beyond that. So help spread the word. If you haven't seen it, you now can get tickets, which you've not been able to do for a while. And if you've already seen it, then you want to come back and see it again and tell your friends about it. Anyway, we're here today for a very special event to chat with the gentleman who created that show. And would you join me, please, in welcoming Richard Maltby and David Shire. I thought I'd start with, we've gotten, as many of you know, we've gotten just incredible reviews for this production. There have been many that just hit the nail so beautifully on the head, but I thought to start this out, I would just quote this review from Lighting and Sound America by David Barber. It starts out, given the rapidly receding level of craft in our modern musical theater, I'm beginning to think we should keep Closer Than Ever on permanent display. If we did, aspiring composers and lyricists could study the incomparable wedding of words and melodies in these songs by Richard Maltby Jr. and David Shire, and aspiring librettist directors and producers might finally learn once and for all the one unbreakable rule of the form, which is increasingly forgotten in our world of jukebox musicals, Gershwin pastiches, and rock star vanity projects. To write songs for a musical is to be a playwright. Closer Than Ever, thank you. Closer Than Ever is a finely chosen series of vignettes and penetrating character studies in song, a signal demonstration of what can be achieved when words and music are put to the purpose of creating an incisive, dramatic situation. It pretty much captures the whole thing beautifully. And the entire review is a love letter. Yeah. Thank you very much. This is very fun. Go eat your snacks. We're done. Do you either of you want to riff on any of that?
I agree with it. I wrote it myself.
Yeah.
So it's very nice, and it is true. I think what distinguishes our work from a lot of other work, especially in this show, which is less a review in the traditional sense of the word than a collection of short stories. One-act plays, one-act scenes, one-scene plays. And I think that's what's unique about it, and I think it's what people respond to. When it was initially on, people would come in and say, we like the songs, but what's the overall plot? The first song is one thing, and the next song is one thing, but now people seem to come in understanding that it's not a book show, and it's not quite a review.
It's certainly unlike any other review, and I think it's better to just not call it a review.
But it's that dramatic aspect that songs begin one place and take you someplace else, like a little play, which is also the difference between pop music and why sometimes those jukebox musicals seem so static, because the songs start at point A and maybe get to B. But, you know, the one move, one emotion, and these songs, maybe due to this guy, tend to take you on a little bit of a journey.
Richard.
I started to say
So,
something?
yes.
I don't know. I was just going to say it's reviews traditionally are comedy. You know, they're sketch comedy and light songs, and occasionally maybe a serious song somewhere in the middle of it. I don't know of another show that is basically about people and it's sort of emotionally based. So people who come out of the show being very moved the way that you would be moved if you were at a play. Great. I must say that's the reaction that I'm finding most kind of thrilling.
And that it is not only aged wonderfully, it seems to speak to people of all ages now.
We had a whole bunch of kids from a theater camp here last night. They were, 18 to 22, and they really loved the show. I did have to say, come back in 20 years when you find out what the songs are about.
Interestingly enough, we occasionally ask young people why they respond to this material. Because they're 20 years younger than the songs, and they say it gives us great insights into our parents. Now we understand them a little.
Now there's a lot. When the show first opened, it was a big, it was a darling in colleges. That people, a lot of people bought it and listened to it for a year or two and do it backwards and forwards. And those people now, like 20 years later, are coming to see the show, and the universal response is, "Oh, that's what the songs are." And it's really nice, and I think the world has changed. I think that people have gotten people who know the songs have found out what's really in them because they're deceptive. They have a surface lightness to them, and then but their subjects are really serious things that we all know and love in our lives. How Prince came to the opening night, and at the end of the intermission, he said, "This show is very disturbing." And I think what he meant was that he was listening to what's underneath the surface of the song, because it's really about how screwed we are as adults. We have to live. God sends a joke. God, who has this infinite sense of humor, sends us exactly the thing that we can't deal with, along with the other thing that we want, so that you're dealing with utter incompatible contradictions that happen to coexist in your life. And you know what you do as a grown-up? You do it. So the songs are basically about an awful lot about that. They're about what you lost, what you gained, the price you paid for it, don't we all know that? All of us sitting in this room.
George Dvorsky in the cast, in the discussion last night with the theater camp kids, talked about what he thought was probably the most important piece of direction that you gave them as a cast. Was it's not about being depressed, it's not about being a victim. Yes, it's about powering through and accepting what is thrown at you.
Considering that many of the things that are dealt with are serious, the songs are not sad and the show isn't sad. The show is rather exhilarating. I'm happy to find out.
Well, let's leap backwards in time to when you all met. This is a Yale. We don't have to go into the year exactly, but
Why no?
why?
Why? 55.
55. What were each of your reactions to each other?
I thought he was a young preppy theater snob. And he thought
He was a dick from Buffalo.
and we were both kind of right.
What was the kind of doing? Now we were both right. David arrived at the Dramat with a score to a musical. He didn't have a story, a book, or any words or lyrics, but he had the score to a musical. It had 2 ballads, a comedy song, a beguine, and he played them all, and he sort of said, "Well, here, make a show out of it." And of course, the pretentious prep school snob said, "What are you talking about?" You know, I think we basically.
We were the only game in town for each other.
He was the only person who came and wanted to be a composer. I was the only person who wanted to write musicals. There was no way we could avoid working together. Believe me, for a year we really tried. Looking back on it, I have to say that it was, you know, I hate to keep invoking the deity here, but God sends us some presents in our life, and. Who knew that this kid from Buffalo who came in and was so dopey as to present a score without a musical was actually a brilliant musician. His sense of harmony, his sense of melody, his sense of freshness, his rooting through his father in the traditions of Gershwin and Kern and Rogers, of the great writers. He sort of assimilated all of that and made it, found his own vocabulary in that. I think every now and then of the many, many people who could have been there and come from Buffalo and had a score, and that would have been the end of their talent, you know. And I could have started working with that and probably, you know, done that for a while. But instead, I lucked out, and I got a genuine artist,
And so did I.
Now you can go have the breakfast. So in the course of your years at Yale, you all wrote a number of shows.
We wrote 2 shows. One was, our first show was a musical adaptation of Cyrano de Bergerac. And Richard was the treasurer of the Yale Dramat. And it was the most expensive show that the Dramat
I think I
matter of fact, it bankrupt the Yale Dramat. And next year, senior year, he was not treasurer. But we did another show called Grand Tour, which was really a rip-off of Time of the Cuckoo, but we couldn't get the rights, so we called it Grand Tour and kind of ripped off the plot. But it was a very exciting time at Yale, because the people we had in these shows included Dick Cabot, Carrie Murray, Austin Pendleton, John Badham was the stage manager, Peter Hunt was the lighting designer, and Gretchen Cryer and Nancy Ford. Gretchen Cryer was the lead in Grand Tour, and Nancy Ford was the rehearsal cast. They were the lives of divinity students, and Yale then was sadly non-co-ed, and we had to go to the graduate schools to get.
We discovered writing Cyrano that Yale just doesn't have people who sing. They have singers. They have singers who are in the whiffin blues. That sort of non-singing, that blindy singing, that just, you know, drives you crazy. And so we really had trouble casting that show. And so the next year, no dopes, we wrote a show with 2 female leads. because you could get the female, you could get the women from the drama school. We actually, Gretchen wasn't in the drama school, but.
And the review out there on the wall, it says, Gretchen Cryer, something like a local housewife, sings the lead.
She's so much not a local housewife.
Interestingly enough, I left out Lynn Meadow, who was 10 years old at the time. 12. And she and her mother, Ginny Meadow, were in the ensemble of Grand Tour. And they were teenagers.
We had the opening was a schoolhouse scene, so we needed a bunch of kids, and Jenny brought in her daughter Lynn, and there's a lovely photograph of Lynn, taller than anybody else at the age of 12. It was nice. We did a recording of it, and her mother asked me to sign her record, and I wrote something nice about her mother, and then I said, and mother of the fabulously talented Lynn. Kind of a cute thing to say. What do you say to a starstruck 12-year-old girl? I mean, it changed her life.
But it changed.
She paid me back.
Fate Misbehaving and our starting Money all began as projects from Manhattan Theater Company. So it was another very godlike gift.
But now in certain write-ups, there's talk about The Great Gatsby.
That was a previous, that was the one before.
That was our freshman year.
Yeah.
And did it get on?
It was done there. It was done. It was done. Yeah. It was done at the drama school. It was on the graduate level.
I'm not sure. Tommy Morgan, who became executive at Columbia Records, and had some of the luminaries with it. And we aspired to do that.
And did you have the rights to that?
Oh no, we didn't do that.
Not great guys.
I see.
That's what, if we could only get a show like that on before we got out.
I see.
Now, to put it in a context of, nowadays, just about every college in the country has a musical theater training program. They're training singers, dancers, performers, and writers. And Yale has an endowed program that teaches book writing, songwriting, and lyric writing. When we were there, the curriculum was David and I wanted to write a musical, so we did. I mean, not only was there no musical theater training, there wasn't even there was a theater major, a theater major, which basically was the first year of the drama school, and I think I was the only person in it. Maybe two other people were in it. In other words, it wasn't popular. It wasn't a thing that had any kind of cachet going for it. But as a result, we could make our own way because there were also no rules against anything. So when we decided to do Cyrano, what did we know? 5 sets, the most elaborate period costume. If you want to pick a period that had elaborate costumes, that's the most elaborate, and we built all of them. We designed and built all of the costumes. The 5 sets were huge. We had an orchestra. We didn't have an orchestra pit, but we had an orchestra. And we brought up an orchestrator friend who orchestrated the show for almost nothing. And we did this just huge production because nobody said we couldn't. It was kind of, it was a very heady time.
Was there anyone on the faculty who would step in and say you might want to consider this, or was it really just you all saying this?
The Yale Dramatic Association was the sort of official theater organization, extracurricular activity, I guess, and it had a board, and one person in the drama school was assigned to the theater. It happened to be Nikos Sakaropoulos. I don't know if you know his name, but Nikos started the Williamstown Summer Theater, which is maybe one of the most glamorous and artistically fulfilling theaters anywhere in the country. And so we had behind us an artistic standard. And we didn't know better, so we just did it right. You know, we just aimed at making it as good as we possibly could do. And that was a terrific experience because we didn't know what we had. In fact, if looking back on it, I sort of think when you're going through a kind of a golden age, you never know it. You never know it until after it's over.
And the first recorded song that we ever had, then 5 or 6 years later, came out of that Cyrano show. It was probably the first really good song that we wrote, called Autumn, which is on Barbra Streisand's either second or third album. It was a song, by the way, that was sung in a convent.
By Roxanne when she goes to the convent.
And it had a chorus, because we were man-heavy, of monks. And someone pointed out, why in a convent? Because it sounded good.
And that ended up in starting.
Yeah, we had mentioned it.
So what were you all majoring in?
David was 5/8 capo.
I studied English, and because my dad was band leader, he was famous as Richard's father, who was a nationally known band leader. My father was kind of the Lester Landon of Buffalo, and had a society band and taught pop music, which in those days pop music was theater music. So growing up, I didn't listen to the standard children's songs. I was constantly being bathed in Richard Rodgers and Clark Gable. What was the question that I started saying?
What you were majoring in, but this is great because I want to go back and get.
Yeah, so my first musical experiences professionally were sitting in with my dad's.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is your fire safety director. We have concluded our test of the building's communication system. Thank you for your cooperation.
We will say it again. They always say it twice. Just.
May I have your attention, please? This is your fire safety director. We have concluded our test of the building's communication system. Thank you for your cooperation.
Does that make you feel better?
So anyway, when I sat in with my dad's band, they talked to these professional musicians who all had day jobs, worked in various places and played gigs at night. And they said, kid, it's very hard to make a living as a musician, and odds are you're not going to make it. So you better cover your bets, because I always said I'm going to be a professional musician. So I majored in English because that still allowed me to do all this extracurricular stuff. But after we wrote the show junior year, I realized that I had to go full deal with giving music a try. And then I became a double major. They let me major in music too. I'd taken a lot of music electives. And I was studying with a classical composition teacher named Quincy Porter, who wrote string quartets and symphonies. And I said, instead of writing a classical piece for my senior thesis, I'd like to submit the musical. And he said, well, I don't know. I've never taken a musical as a senior project. I said, well, you might take this one. I don't have any choice because I don't have time to write anything else because I'm writing music. So he came to the musical and said, it was erudite enough that he accepted. He said, if you write a quick piano, one movement, sonatine, so I dashed one off and got out of Yale.
Well, you said you were sitting in with your dad's band. What were you playing?
Oh, all that society.
No, I meant the instrument.
Oh, piano.
Piano.
Yeah.
Oh.
My dad was a pianist, I was a pianist.
You know,
By the way, that's why if I sing, for those of you who've seen the show and know it's going to be close or whatever, it started out as being a homage to our father. We always wanted to write a song about the two of us.
I mean, the surface of what happened to us maybe is you know, it's kind of okay, but it might be interesting to just go back through what we did. Here we are. We're two people in college. We want to write a musical. There are no rules. There's no books. There's no textbooks. There's no one can teach you how to do it. You have to teach yourself. The fact that David was you know, gifted but innocent, but you know, led, and I was pretentious, led me to try to analyze. When David would write something, I would try to analyze why I didn't think it was enough. I didn't think it didn't go far enough, it wasn't dramatic enough, it didn't, you know, I would say, why doesn't the note go up instead of down, and David would get upset.
But he was right.
Well, but here we were, two people who didn't really know anything, but we had to teach ourselves. And we taught ourselves, we would play the cast albums of things we loved and try to figure out why that worked and why that was exciting and where the excitement really was. And in the process, we taught ourselves what a show is, and we taught ourselves, and luckily we had an opportunity to see two of the shows put on the stage so that we could see where we hit it and where we didn't. And I think that maybe is the most significant thing about how we arrived at whatever it is, you know, our particular style. We just hammered it out.
Well, from things you've said, it sounds like a lot of that same process is how you still work today.
Well, what else?
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, that's it. I mean, we still do exactly what we did.
Discuss both sides of the.
Except I'm not innocent.
No, but I'm still pretentious.
Now, I throw away his lyrics for the band, and he throws away music, and I don't get angry because I know he's usually right.
And because it isn't about right or wrong,
Yeah.
it isn't about who's right. It's never about who's right. It's does this work or doesn't? Is this a good idea? Is this what are we going for? We usually know if we start something and it just sits there. That we know that something's wrong. We don't know what it is, and then we try to figure out what it is that would be right. What are we missing? What emotion are we? What in it is phony? What is it that's false? What is it that's not the goods? That's what basically what we keep saying. Oh, what's the goods? What's this really about? And when we finally unlock that, usually the rest of the songs, you know, come alive. David, very often, I'll write a little piece of the lyric. Sometimes I'll write a lot of a lyric, and David tries to set it valiantly, and usually it's not very interesting. The music isn't very interesting because I haven't really given him anything particularly interesting to work on. And inevitably we get to the point where I said, well, David, now that we've talked about it, now you understand. Now why don't you write it? Why don't you write the melody? It's going to be, the title's going to be here, the idea is going to be there. It's going to go through this process, and then very often he'll come up with something, and then we will talk about the music. But we're really talking about the scene. We're really talking about the character, what the character action is, and then when we get the music right, then I go back and start to work on the lyric, and then we actually work together on a lot of the lyric as well, for clarity.
And the music, Richard really directs my composition. I'll have a good first chorus, but he's taught me how to write dramatic music rather than just pretty melodies or interesting melodies. And that leads to more interesting songs. It's like saying to a comedian, be funny. You know, look at somebody saying, you write a pretty melody. It's very difficult unless I'm thinking about a character or a scene. And as a result, I've started to write lyrics over the last 10 or 20 years and gotten better and better at it, because it's hard now for me even to think of a melody without hearing some words with it. But that's made me more useful to Richard.
I always think of music when I write the lyrics, but I can't write them down and it disappears. I'm stuck with whatever he writes. No, as a result, there's something really kind of bizarre about the songs, and that is that when we finish, because of this process of sort of honing it, letting the character keep talking, and as the scene develops in the song, I have a kind of a disconnect about the songs. When the songs go by in the show, I know that I wrote them, but there's a certain sense of where did that ever come from? I don't always remember. And I never remember the process of writing, because the actual sort of writing is secondary to I don't know, the channeling process. And also the lines get changed. We change a word, change a sentence, and then slowly it evolves and it becomes something, and then you sort of realize that's it, it's okay. So it hasn't actually been like written. So as a result, I don't really have a problem directing my own material, because it's a foreign country. It's like, oh, that's an interesting line. Why do you think that's there? And I don't know the answer.
And talking about the process of putting this show back together, it seems like there was even more of that. You rediscovering it as you heard it through new voices and new interpretations.
After 20 years away.
Well, this time around, Jen and Christian, Jen Colella and Christian Noel joined the show, and I've always adored the way Sally Mays and then Winterstellar did the show, and they're sort of the model for it. But I gave the women really one directive. I sort of said, don't ever think that there are 5 words that you have to get past to get to the part that matters. Look at those 5 words too, and find something in that as well. And they did it, and they made every piece of it a part of the character that they were talking about. And the other change we did in this production was that we really made a direct contact with the audience. That they really are talking as if to a friend, right to you, and using people that were right in front of them. As a result, the conversational quality of the language came alive, and each one of them would do little things in the middle of a sentence that just would put a kind of a twist that only life can give to sentences. And it began to come alive in an absolutely new way. Those 2 small things, when applied to everything, and turned into coming from really skilled actors. So the other thing, I said a third thing, which is you don't sing these songs. They are not about singing. You have to inhabit these songs. You have to be the person who is talking. Be that person, and when you are, you as with anything in real life, you don't. A conversation is not just about the conversation. It also has a past, has a history. If you're talking about your marriage or something like that, there's a lot in any simple sentence that goes by, and if you start thinking that way, sentences take on a little twist. When we talk to anybody that we're close to, a single word will have a little kind of a twist to it because it has a past on it. So I encouraged them to do that, to make sure that everything had was in the context of a full life. Those three things in the hands of really, really skilled actresses just exploded the songs. They had wit, they had life, they had humanity. I mean, I felt it would be really great that when the song is over, you almost don't remember that it was sung. You know, yes, it's sung, and yes, you have to sing really, really well to sing the song. But the point of it is what a person has said, and you've gotten to know a person, of course. I think that's not something that happens often in musicals. So I think it's one of the reasons why you sit in the theater and think this is not like any other show I've seen.
And you're talking specifically about the women in the cast because the two guys did the show 2 years ago.
They had done it 2 years before. However, I did a trick on them. On the first day, the women went to rehearsal because they were new a week ahead of time, and then the guys came in the following week. So on the first day, when the guys were there, I didn't tell them anything. I just said, we're just going to sing through the show, you know, guys, if you can stand up if you want, or just sit there and sing the song, sing your songs. And the girls, you can sing some, or if you've staged it in any way, you can get up and do your number, right? Knowing that, so that's what we did, and the women were doing all of this stuff, and the guys were going, oh my God. Oh, I'm going to have to start over again. Oh my God, is this what I'm going to have to be up against? And as a result, they went and cracked open what they were doing and sort of started over again.
David, did you have a thought you were heading in about this whole process, about revisiting this after 20 years? It's fine.
It was like rediscovering a lot of this. Because I tend to sometimes forget that I've written. It's almost like I have to clear things out of my head so that new things can come in. So it's like Richard said, it's a little bit of a detachment, like, oh my God, I didn't know that I knew how to do that. It sometimes happens when we listen to the college, some of the college stuff. In a way, it's a little depressing because I feel, well, I haven't learned that much new in 40 years because, you know, we could hear everything back there. But it's been very fulfilling. And unlike Richard, who was in rehearsal with the show every day, I would come in every 3 or 4 days because we have a wonderful musical director, Andrew Burrow, who just is 3 times as meticulous as I am. And by every detail, milking everything out of the score. And so I didn't have to come in really and supervise. So I came in every 3 or 4 days, which gave me a kind of objectivity about what was going on. And the first time we came in, we saw, especially the women, because I had seen them before, I was just, oh my God, it's wonderful. And so it's really been kind of a vacation.
So back to your the beginnings of your career. You finished Yale, moved here at some point, and
it was 6 months in the Army National Guard to get that out of the way.
In those days, they had first of all, you had to have, everybody got drafted. You had to go to the Army, and you had to have 2 years of military service. But if there was a 6-month program where you could go in for 6 months and then you were in the reserves for 5.5 years, so we decided we could do that. Oh, David made it basic training. it was hilarious. You only need to run down the bayonet court and yell, "Kill, kill!" Shoot a bayonet. Just David, I mean, really.
I won't tell what you were. The only musically significant thing that happened in our Army career is that when we were doing the once a week meetings for 3 years at the Park Avenue Armory and marching, we were and a company that had a company song to Marching Matilda. Marching along, boys, marching along, boys, we'll go a-marching company, and we'll never give a care for the memories of taste by. So, the guys got to know that we were songwriters. We had an off-Broadway show at the time. They said, well, why don't you write a new company song? So we did. We wrote a song, what was it called?
I don't remember.
And the company, we presented the company, and they rejected it and went back to waltzing. Other than that, it was very non-musical.
We did write the theme song of the 92nd Street Y, which is taught to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. And of course, we wrote a really complicated song. I mean, we thought it was sort of simple, but it's really a hard melody. But if you don't tell 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds that it's a hard melody, they just sing it. And it's really something to hear a bunch of a whole room full of school kids singing. There's a Y for everything.
It's a beautiful song, if I might just say.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And did you know they wrote it?
I did not.
Oh.
There's a Y for everything. Why does the grass grow? Why does the sky blue?
And everything for our Y.
And there's a Y for everything and everything for a Y.
So you were doing this while you had your first show running? This is
Yeah, I was
Sapphire
making
Live?
a living as a theater rehearsal pianist and vocal coach and going up to the Catskills and bands, playing for singers, kind of musical odd jobs to
Which
make a living.
pianists can have.
Yeah.
Lyricists, no. I wrote the Columbia Record Club magazine. In those days, you had a month, you signed up and you got a record every month, right? And you got the selection of the month, or you had some alternates. And every record had to be described. And, after you're sitting there in the office writing a 3-sentence blurb about the trio Los Panchos plays south of the border hits. As a matter of fact, after I was there for 3 months, I wrote something for the trio Los Panchos plays south of, and I thought I got some metaphor going about cactuses and everything. And I looked at it and I thought, hey, that's really good. And I stopped and I said, no, it isn't. And if I stay here one more minute, I'll think it is good. I quit.
Well, so but your goal all along was to invite shows.
Within a year in New York, we had an off-Broadway show called The Sapphire Live, which played at it was then 1 Sheridan Square. It's been 55 things since then. Basement
Right.
theater. But it was directed by Bill Francisco, who became a prominent director in New York, and now is where.
He went to Wesleyan, where he was the professor who taught Lin-Manuel Miranda. How about that for?
But some songs came out of Sapphire Life, which we have recycled in other things.
She loves me not from it, actually.
Yeah. And watching the big parade go by, which we're all been starting this time. We're very ecological. We keep putting the songs in different shows until they wind up in something that runs. But Gershwin did that too. The Man I Love was in 2 shows that it was cut from before it finally wound up
In
where it
something.
stayed.
Sorry to jump back, but that brings up a question I wanted to ask you. As you were learning from your father, all the significant writers, the work of very significant writers, was there one that you gravitated to, Jacob, with?
Probably Gershwin. Because he straddled both pop and the kind of more distinguished pop concert. His vocabulary was just bigger than anyone else's. in terms of harmony when you take the concert mix and the song. It's really kind of amazing.
But I actually think, while that's all true, that inside the songs, there's more Kern.
Yeah.
I mean, the harmonic complexity of Jerome Kern is just astonishing.
That's quite true. And one of my musical odd jobs that I was always equating myself with before I could make a living as a composer was playing cocktail piano in various bars, first in Buffalo and Polish bars, and then more distinguished clubs, and in New York. So I was constantly bathed in this music. It just was second nature to me. And that's really the teaching program. I learned from the tradition that got into my hands. And as it says, if I sing, when I reach, the chords were often there. And I think that's, even though there was no music program at Yale, theater music, we learned because we were constantly listening to cast albums and emulating them. I remember when we were writing Cyrano, the cast album, The West Side Story, came out that year. So if you listen carefully to that score, you'll hear all of these West Side Story, all these Bernsteinisms in the score. The next year, Most Happy Fella came out, and if you listen to that score, there's all these Frank Lesserisms. But that's the way you learn.
It could be graceful to call them influences, but in fact we just stole. I mean, there's abundanza right there.
That's the way you learn. A composition teacher once said to me, before you can be a composer, you've got to pretend to be a composer. In the highest sense.
Yeah, it's true about any art form. You learn from people, the work of people you admire, and you can't try to be.
And now we're sometimes accused in reviews of having sanhonitis because you can't help but be influenced by Steve's work. And he mentored us from the moment, almost the moment we got off the boat, or one of another 100 people getting off the bus in New York. He was very generous to us. We would go over and play him songs. And, he just ate up his shows. I even worked on company as a dance music arranger. I was a rehearsal pianist for anyone who can whistle. And it's just, for me anyway, impossible not to be influenced by all of that.
But a lot of the songs that people say, oh, that has Sondheim influence, were actually songs we wrote before Sondheim wrote his version.
And he's admitted that. He called me up one night and said, I'm writing a song for anyone who can whistle called
Parade. There's a parade in town.
There's a parade in town. And he said, I know you guys were watching the big parade go by. Do you think it's fair to take that metaphor? I said, it's really public domain, because Jerry Herman, below Dollar, parade passing by. But it was nice of him to even recognize.
We did it again, actually, because we had a song called "To Be Alive" in a show called Love Match, and that was sort of a big, exciting song. And he just written "Being Alive" out of town for company, and I called up and said, "You're mine." First of all, what are we going to say? Yes, I'm mine. But it was just nice that he asked.
I told Richard this story the other day. I was coming in at the beginning of intermission. I guess one of our ushers and a couple were in the elevator coming out. When I got in, they came out, went out, and the usher got back in, and she said, that couple couldn't wait to get out of here. They hated the show. I said, what's the hate? She said, they hate Sondheim, and this is just like Sondheim. They had to think too much.
Well, somebody did say, we had one of these sessions, and there was a talk, question period, and somebody, I think he meant it as a compliment. He said, these really wonderful songs, but do you think audiences really want to think that hard? You want to listen that hard. You want to listen that hard. And I thought, probably that's right. The audiences work during the show.
And I think that's another reason we played it song. We like those kind of songs. It's been the glory of our career, and it's also been very frustrating. Because we've tried to write simple pop songs.
We think we're writing mainstream all the time. We just think we're writing right down the middle of the street. And it's a big surprise to find out that these are very complex songs that are
They are
often
complex,
misunderstood.
and it's not about getting into comparisons, but the warmth and the genuine characters that are evoked in the writing and the music, the words and the music is, I think, what draws most people in.
The advantage to them, like with Steve, is the songs really bear repeated listening without getting boring, and acting interpretations. I think that's one of the things that's made this one so exciting, that people who know the album are coming back. And the songs are very rich with language and ideas, and they don't land completely, I think, that first year, just like Steve's songs. But you know, there's that old cliche, a good theater song is one who come out of the show whistling. And no one came out of West Side Story whistling, hoo, hoo. I mean, but my criteria is, do you want to hear it again so you will be able to whistle? And that's...
Now, I have a very fast musical memory. If you play something, I can pretty much, remember what it was. When West Side Story opened, that melody, da 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 dee, da da, I could not figure that out. I couldn't get it in my head. Now everybody knows it now. It's an old shoe. But when it first came out, it was odd, and it's hard to remember that it was that odd. I used to I taught for a while at NYU. When they started their theater program, and after a while, I realized that I had to have a class which I called Dealing with Steve. And really, what it is if you're a young songwriter, you can't find a road to go down that doesn't have one of his songs sitting there as a roadblock. I wrote that one. I wrote one of the, you can't come up with an idea that he hasn't already written. And I had that experience, actually. We were working on one song, and it was so elaborately written, so elaborately rhymed. Totally accurate, but it was so elaborately rhymed that you actually couldn't follow it, because it was so, you got lost in the dense rhyming of it. And when I realized that was true, I realized, I'm never going to out-clever Steve. I could put all the rhymes in, and I could be as clear as possible. I am never going to outdo that. And I had this sort of epiphany, which is that there's only one thing that I am that Steve will never be, and that's me. And for better or worse. And so if I write things out of me and my own perceptions of things, they won't sound like Steve. And that was really liberating, and that was, kind of, that's what we've done. And I think our songs are complex the way this stuff is, but I don't think that, I don't think Steve would have written any of these songs. I don't think he'd want to. I don't think he'd have these thoughts. And so I do think it's a very different vocabulary that we have, using sort of the same dictionary.
I've always thought that the song Three Friends, which opens the second act, of course, whenever was very whenever, and Steve came to the show about a week ago and wrote a nice email to us the next day and said, there was a song that I don't believe I've heard before, but it was my favorite one on the show, Three Friends. And I wrote back, told him that I thought that was the one that I felt was most influenced by his style of writing.
Very interesting.
Although it's a subject I don't even write about. Three friends.
Yeah.
The idea that and this came from my wife. Who does not have? Who in this room does not have 2 or 3 close friends who have been your friends ever since childhood? And if you actually looked at them, you'd wonder why on earth you would never spend time with them. They are the least like you, you have absolutely nothing in common whatsoever, except that you are the closest friends. And you will be till the end of your life. So I just thought it was kind of, who doesn't have that?
True. True. What did that song come from?
Well, my wife had friends from high school, and we spent every New Year's with them, and 2 other couples. And over the years, I mean, we diverged so completely. I mean, they were not like us at all. They're not like Janet at all. And they were just, you know, who are these people? But nothing would stop us from having that New Year's Eve every year. And there's no complaint. They're actually wonderful. I really like them, and I think one of the things that I like about them is that there's no reason for them to be in our life. And you know, theater is kind of a closed world. It's nice to kind of know there are people who have other interests.
Let's leap quickly to Starting Here, Starting Now, your first review, which was a wonderfully successful show. It began at the Manhattan Theater Club.
Yeah. Well, the Manhattan Theater Club had, I don't know if you remember, on 73rd Street, it had a big theater in the back and a small theater, and then it had it used to be a Bohemian Hall, and it had a bar. It had this big wood-paneled bar, and they kept trying to figure out what to do with it. And so for a long time, they were trying to make it into a cabaret space. And people would come in and do their nightclub acts, and you know, they'd sell drinks and everything. And Lynn was trying to figure out what she could do in there that maybe had some kind of artistic content. And at that time, David was in California writing film score after film score, and I was training myself to be a director here in New York. And we had a body of songs, but we hadn't written anything recently. And most of the songs that we had written were connected with shows that had not run very long, or that had never been produced, or so that they were all kind of like failure songs. And Lynn said, well, why don't we just do a cabaret evening that's just your songs? And I thought, ooh. And I mentioned it to David, and he thought, worse than ooh. Crazy. And I said, well, just send the sheet music that we've got, and we'll just see what we can do. And I mean, we were picking up in rehearsal, picking up a sheet of paper and you know, before anybody could sing it. But I asked a couple of performers that I knew, Lonnie Ackerman and Marjorie Cohen, if they would do it, and they both said yes. And George Lee Anderson, they said yes. I was really stunned that they would, you know, they wanted to do it. And so we had all of these songs, and it was interesting to come upon them because many of the songs had not worked in shows that they had been in, and I thought they probably weren't very good. And I was surprised to find how good they were. But more than that, I was surprised to find how tricky they were. Suddenly started forgiving all of the directors who had screwed up these songs because I started making the same mistakes. They have a surface kind of bubbliness to them, and if you go with the surface bubbliness, then you miss what's really going on. And in fact, the songs are usually exactly the opposite of what they seem to be. A bouncy, happy song is really the way that that someone deals with, you know, a nervous breakdown. And so I began to see that what we'd actually written, and it was, Lynn really kind of gave us back us, because we put that together, put it all on the stage. The audience really loved it, and so we moved it to a theater restaurant on 46th Street where it played for 6 months, and then it was traveled, went all over the place, and played in the arena stage in Washington for a year, and you know, that sort of thing. It was really, but that was the way we kind of discovered what it was we had written. We actually had added some other songs.
We should put it all together, and he said you should come to New York and see it. And, I will see all of these.
You were in California?
California. Got to go and listen to all these failed songs. And I came in and I was in tears at the end of it. I thought, my God. You wrote all that stuff, and it isn't lousy. And I got involved with the show. We wrote I think we wrote 4 or 5 more songs to fill out. We
Even, there were some grown-up songs like that. I don't remember Christmas.
It's interesting hearing you all talk about this process, because it sounds very much like putting this show together and rediscovering it as well.
I guess that's the recurring theme. Maltby and Shire do not have any idea what they were and constantly had to be reminded painfully.
On that
and
note,
to a great surprise that it was any good.
On that note, I'm being told that it's time for intermission. So,
Mission?
yes, so people can have breakfast snacks.
Breakfast snacks. And
Yes, you
back.
may have to, we'll get you back.
What if they don't come back?
I bet they will. How many people are coming back?